Bathed by the warm waters of the Adriatic Sea, Dalmatia is the most southern region of Croatia. This rocky shoreline, punctuated by steep islands, has been home for millennia to some of the oldest Mediterranean vineyards. But it was in the 19th century that Dalmatian viticulture experienced its golden age. The coast and the islands were then covered with terraces, carved into the mountains. Today, 30 years after the breakup of the former Yugoslavia, a new generation of wine growers is starting a winemaking revolution on the slopes. Thanks to them, unique grape varieties in the world are gaining a foothold all around the Dalmatian Riviera. From the sea, the island of Hvar looks like an impregnable citadel. A block of limestone with rough and rocky soil, where the sun hits hard for the first hours of the day. It is here, however, in the small village of Sveta Nedelja, that Nikola Plenković and his family produce one of the most famous wines in all of Dalmatia.
The
working conditions here are very difficult, and that contributes to the incomparable quality of our vineyard. The proof is that the wine produced here on the south side of the island of Hvar receives awards from all over the world. At the time of my grandfather, this was the poorest place on the island of Hvar. But at the end of the communist period, my father had the idea to replant vines here and help the people of the village to create a new vineyard.
Nikola's father, Zlatan Plenković, is considered the first independent winemaker in the country. Here on his native island, he's a true legend. It must be said that the culture terraces, roads, and even the port of the village were built by him, almost single-handedly, in the early 90s. While the Eastern Bloc collapsed in Europe, Zlatan Plenković was building his kingdom here with his bare hands. And when he had finished moving the mountains, the Hercules of the island of Hvar carved a cave in the kingdom of Calypso.
This was a crazy idea from my father. He decided to build this cellar where we work today, 4 meters below sea level. It's the only cellar that's under sea level in Croatia, and certainly in Europe, probably in the world. Perhaps this sea air also brings something a little different to our wine.
Between sea and mountain, Nikola Plenković's wine can freely express its aromas today, but this freedom was paid for dearly by his father. In the former Yugoslavia, it was not a good idea to challenge the communist authorities.
My father was a fisherman and a farmer. He worked on state-owned lands. In 1986, when he wanted to start his own business in Hvar, he was told that if he persisted, he'd be put in prison. But when the country opened up, he was able to create his first small business. And in 1993, he theated the Zlatan Otok estate, which is still our name today.
Zlatan Plenković passed away in 2016. He was a true pioneer. At a time when the page of communist rule turned, he impacted the history of the Croatian vineyard. His dreams revived his isolated village at the foot of the cliffs, as well as other villages in the archipelago where his friends still follow the course he set. A few miles north of Hvar, on the neighboring island of Brač, the memory of Zlatan Plenković is still most vivid today. At the Bol Cooperative, one of the oldest in Dalmatia, his friend Ivica Kovacevic, the site manager, comes every morning to help Dovile awaken the wine that ferments at the bottom of the tanks. She must mix the juice with the skins remaining on the surface so that the tannins spread homogeneously. This operation is called Reassembly, and for Ivica Kovacevic, that's how you create a quality wine.
Unfortunately, in the days of the former Yugoslavia, during the communist era, we fell far behind. There was a decline in the entire wine sector. In 2009, when we took over this cellar, I must say that we found it in a very bad state. We had to renovate it completely and modernize the equipment.
At the head of the Stina Vino estate, Ivica Kovacevic and his teams turned away from the methods inherited from the past. That was when wine was meant to quench the thirst of the workers. The goal now is to satisfy the world's most demanding palates. For 10 years, in Brač, in the harbor as well as up on the mountain, a new wind is rising over the ruins of the past. And at the top of the mountains, that wind blows strong. In Dalmatia, it even has a name. It's called the Bura, and it's said that it can drive you mad. Could it have blown too often into Ivica's ears? Here, around the abandoned village of Stipancic, he has in fact set out to revive these ghost vineyards. Stone after stone, his teams remounted low walls on the most dizzying slopes in the country. At 1,500 feet above sea level, 50,000 vines have been replanted, and the grape harvest here is prepared much like an alpine expedition. Up on the heights of Bol, the slopes regularly exceed a slope of 50 degrees. Even if you don't come by helicopter, you still have to have a steady heart to get to the top.
Here's a basket. The last one's for me.
On these steep slopes, only one grape variety has been able to plant its roots. It's called Plavat Smali.
We work as if we were on flat land. Fill the crates well.
Like the inhabitants of the island, the Plavat Smali stands up to everything: the rocks around its roots, the sometimes violent wind, and the overwhelming heat. It is a rustic grape, a mountain dweller, which thrives on the poor soils of these Dalmatian terroirs. Its grapes are small and dark, but full of sugar and aromas. They give a red wine with a beautiful garnet robe that reigns supreme on the Dalmatian tables, especially when the late autumn harvests are finally complete.
Dear friends, we're gathered around this table to celebrate together the end of this year's harvest. It has been one of the best harvests of the last 20 years. We are all very happy, of course, and we all hope that the winemaking goes as well in our cellars.
To the sound of traditional choirs, they exchange, compare, and advise each other late into the night. The end of the grape harvest is the occasion of a unique rendezvous between all the independent wine growers of the Dalmatian coast. Tomorrow, everyone will go back to his island or his village, but this evening, they sing the joy of a grand reunion. A reunion between friends, between brothers and sisters, and especially between heirs to a common history. A history that has its roots deep in the past. This is what Sarah Popovic's team has revealed in the Stary Grad plain on the island of Hvar. Here, archaeologists are gradually exhuming the remains left by the region's first inhabitants. Here's a little piece. A part of the fantastic house is here. It had floors made of mosaics. Here we just found a small piece of that mosaic. Sarah and her colleagues have found many fragments of mosaics like this in the past 6 months. Precious clues that allow us to know a little bit more about the first inhabitants of this villa, Greek settlers from 4,000 years ago. We're certain that the Greeks planted vines and drank wine here. For now, we haven't found everything the Greeks left in the plain of Stary Grad, but in the city, we've discovered many clues. A lot of coins showing an image of Hvar with images of vines and of Dionysus and vases. For the ancient Greeks, the plain of Stary Grad was a fertile spot at the foot of the mountains. It was there, at the gate of their city of Pharos, that they planted the first vines, the first fields of cereals, and the first olive groves of the country, the basis of the agricultural economy that's lasted for several millennia. The Mediterranean trilogy, that is to say the vines, the wheat, and the olive trees, is present on the island of Hvar, as it is throughout the Mediterranean basin. It was the main economic activity which allowed the island to feed itself and which guaranteed its prosperity. In the wake of the Greeks, all the maritime civilizations have taken turns at the shores of the Adriatic Sea. During the Renaissance, the neighboring island of Korčula was even a trading hub for Southeast Europe. Behind its ramparts, the old town still tells the story of the fortunes of its clergy and merchants. And if a perfume of Italy floats here, it's because Korčula was for a long time part of the Republic of Venice. Moreover, at the time when the island spoke Venetian, it was forbidden to import wines other than the local nectar. And for the historian Tony Lodzica, these protective measures explain the continued growth of production from the Middle Ages to the 19th century.
If we look at the periods when we produced the most wine, the years 1870 to 1890 marked an era of prosperity during which the production was so important that from Vela Luca, the port on the west side of the island, 170,000 hectoliters of wine were exported every year, which comes to 24 million bottles.
The Belle Epoque was an enchanted interlude for the island of Korčula. From west to east, this austere pebble, covered with scrub, was then completely draped with vineyards that resemble ancient pyramids. The ancient Greeks favored lowland soils, which are easy to exploit. But they are so rare here that 19th century winemakers had to carve their terraces up into the steepest slopes.
It's an incredible story. All these vineyards were created between the end of the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th century, between 1880 and 1920, when phylloxera completely destroyed the European vineyards. At that time, my island and all of Dalmatia experienced an incredible boom. We suddenly became the heart of viticulture on a global scale.
Protected from phylloxera by its maritime barrier, the Korčula vineyard resisted the disease 30 years longer than any other European vineyard. It was then that thousands of anonymous local titans wove this huge stone lacework down the slopes facing the sea. A unique epoch in the world that here recalls every rock torn from the ground, every wall erected against the slope. A golden age that has passed on, but one that is still sung by Luka Kranjancic, who is from a long line of Korčulian vine growers.
A few words about these stones. With only his pick, grandfather tore the stones out, taking them out of holes and cutting them. By planting the vine, in fact, he traced my path, vine after vine, 100 years ago. Then setting up walls with the extracted stone, he took the land back from the black pines. And between two rows, he cultivated his vines to feed his children because his life was bitter.
Here at the Kranjancic home, wine is a family story. Like the secret of the Druids, that of great wines is transmitted orally from generation to generation. Today, it's his daughter Ivana who is about to take over the torch from the elders.
It's fruity. It's very good.
Yeah, the fermentation is almost finished.
There's a nice acidity and freshness. This cold fermentation yields surprising flavors.
The sulfur flavor is the only small problem.
But that's easy to solve. There isn't much, and when it stays in the glass, it's already better. It opens up really well. It has a good body and freshness. It'll be excellent in 3 to 4 years.
Red or white, the wines of Luka and Ivana give color back to the island of Korčula. Gradually, locals are replanting rare grape varieties forgotten during the time of mass production. If Luka rehabilitates the local poship, his friend Frano Bire defends another emblem of the island. It makes a white wine as easy to drink as it is difficult to pronounce, the Gurk.
So are you more satisfied with your Plavatsmali or your Gurk?
Well, both turned out well.
There are tropical fruits now in the Gurk.
Yes, there is mango.
That's right. In the nose, While it ferments, one realizes that the Gurk is an incredible grape variety.
Plavac, Gurk, Poship. Maybe your head is already starting to turn a bit. However, in Dalmatia, they say that the list of indigenous grape varieties is as long as the coast itself. Today, every island, every village is rediscovering its iconic variety. Around the small town of Primošten, it's the Babic that makes the Bucevac landscapes world famous. It's a unique grape that grows only in stony ground. Because no, this long checkerboard is not a work of land art. Each of these small boxes, called Vlacica, is home to a family vineyard surrounded by walls carved into the rock.
You see, here you have to turn it over. You arrange it with the other one. You try to combine them. And if it gets stuck, you put a stone in to fix it.
Maintaining these walls today is a bit like playing Tetris, but with big stones.
Okay, but now there are stones missing. We'll redo it. We'll rearrange it.
And that one?
Well, that one, normally, you have to turn it over.
In Bucevac, rebuilding these walls is very important. For Professor Leo Gratsin, it's a duty for the collective memory.
The idea is that our children never forget what the people have done here, the simple villagers. Because concretely, Bucevac is like an oasis, and it may be the last of its kind.
Here, perhaps more than anywhere else in Croatia, vines are born from the stones and the work of the villagers. Each of these tiny juxtaposed parcels is the silent witness of a collective adventure.
In Bucevac, there was only a small vineyard of a few hectares that was the property of the church. After the Second World War, the land was returned to the citizens of Primošten. People got land with the obligation to cultivate their vineyard. It was a real epic, and it happened over just 10 years. Each family worked at their own pace, and in the end, they turned a field of stones into a vineyard. People here have created a noble landscape from limestone and rock to grow grapes and then to produce their wine.
Around the vineyard, in the former Yugoslavia, the inhabitants of Bucevac completed a pioneering project. Workers' gardens open to all, a true socialist utopia. Because Tito's Yugoslavia was that too, a societal project that many evoke today with a touch of nostalgia.
The next step in the project is to register this landscape on the UNESCO list. It would also make it known everywhere. This way, historians from all over the world, but especially the people of the region and future generations, would hold on to the memory of what happened here. I think that's very important.
25 years after its independence, Croatia is rediscovering its winemaking traditions, while at the same time reconciling itself with its past. Since the beginnings of the 1990s, the revival of these vineyards tell the story of the rebirth of a nation with a complicated history. From island to island, its wine growers proudly note the growing reputation of their terroirs and their grape varieties. Through its wines, the voice of the youngest republic of the European Union is now being heard.